I bought a house in Italy. I know this is quite some news. If you have been following my channel, you know that the last 2 years I have been a heavy proponent for medical tourism in Colombia. So this is perhaps a strange choice for you, and you're probably wondering why and how this came about, which I will discuss in this video. Needless to say, I still love Colombia, and Colombia is still a viable and rich choice if you're considering becoming a medical tourist, or if you're considering relocating from the United States or Canada to South America. I have a lot of content regarding why that might be a choice for you. Colombia is a very vital and important country when it comes to medical tourism, but my decision to purchase real estate in Italy has all to do with my personal journey, which I will share in this video. So why Italy? Where did this come about? I studied abroad in Italy when I was a student at university at New York University many years ago. So I had firsthand experience what it was like to live in another country, and I had a wonderful immersion experience. And when I was departing Italy, I knew I wanted to return someday. I had no idea how. And so it was something that stayed in my heart for a very, very long time. If you have a young person that you know, if you have a young college-age student, I heavily encourage them to consider studying abroad. That is a place where I became a woman. I learned so much about myself. I learned self-confidence. I learned what it was like to navigate in a country alone, not speaking the language fluently, and how to figure out my way. So it helped me develop self-efficacy that I could not learn anywhere else. And so it's a very enriching opportunity. So I encourage you to encourage all young people to partake in that journey. So in terms of study abroad, how I got the opportunity to study abroad was that I minored in Romance languages, specifically Spanish. And so I did not fill out the application in time in order to enroll in the Madrid Study Abroad program. And so I was unable to attend their program. But the Italian Study Abroad program was still open. But the prerequisite was that I had to take 1 semester of Italian language. And so I had to hurry up and register, because if you know anything about university, there's a short window in which you can register and drop classes from your schedule. So I remember this was like the 2nd week of classes. So I had to quickly enroll, get all the material, the books I needed to begin learning Italian and attending classes. And the class was at 8 in the morning. So it wasn't like an ideal time for a university student, but nonetheless, I love languages, so it was no effort for me to enroll in it. And I had a basic understanding of Romance language and grammar, so it was relatively easy for me to use my skills from knowing Spanish and add Italian to it. So I had a wonderful Italian professor, did the application process, prepared myself to move abroad the following January, did the visa process. And back then there was no GPS. Was there internet? There was email, but internet wasn't as robust as it was now. The visa application during that time was all paper application, and there was no appointment that you could set an appointment. It was first come, first serve. So because the Italian visa was so popular that I had to wake up 3 o'clock in the morning before they cut off allowing any more appointments and any more attendees in to process their visa application. So I remember taking the train. It was like November. And again, remember, I was leaving in January. I had to get up around like 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., leave the house, and travel to the consulate, which there was already a line outside of other students who were also applying to the study abroad program, not just from my university, but from other universities as well. And we waited outside in the freezing cold until we were called in, and the consulate opened at 9 a.m., just to give you an idea. So we were waiting outside in the cold from 3 a.m. to 9 a.m. and they would only take in a certain number of applicants before they cut off how many people they will allow in. And so that was my visa application process. And I got approved for the visa and I began preparing to study abroad. The day I landed in Florence, Italy, I was picked up along with other students that were coming in at the same time. I didn't know anybody, and we were driven to the registration, the campus essentially, or the villa. It was called Via Natalia in Florence. And so when we arrived, our group, as well as every other student that was flying in, was also waiting to be registered. And I mean hundreds of people. And I remember the line. It was like hundreds of people in front of me. Some students were like sleeping on the floor. Everyone was exhausted because this was like a 10, 12-hour flight. Somehow or another, NYU had a program that was open to other international students at different universities. So we were processed, given a map, and told to find our way home. A few of us found out that we were living in the same vicinity, and we decided to make the journey home together with our luggage, mind you, our luggage and this map. And we were just walking through the streets to find our way home. It was about a 2-mile walk. We had not done any exchange, so we had no money to take a bus. We had no idea how to do a cab because we had no local currency. Nonetheless, we found our way home. And so I say it's a place I became a woman because I had to come out my comfort zone. And daily it was coming out of my comfort zone and becoming acclimated to the environment and learning about myself. I loved Italy. It left an impression on me in my heart, and I knew one day I wanted to return, but I had no idea how. And so I returned to the United States, completed my studies, went to law school, and began my profession. But in 2018, I became extremely restless with what was going on in New York City. The city was going through a strange period, and it was what we can see now, like the beginning of a degradation of the city. The city was filthy. It was dirtier than it's ever been before. There was a rise in crime. There was a rise in homelessness, and I just started to feel unsettled and unsafe. And so I was like, I always thought I would end up living in New York City once I embarked on my career and I started making money, that there was no other place that I wanted to live, and I just loved the energy of the city. Well, this love of this energy of the city existed no longer. I resented the place. I began to resent it so strongly because everything became so difficult. Just carrying groceries was arduous. Getting to and from work was just impossible. I would have to wait for 3 or 4 trains to pass before I can get on the train just to get to work or just to get home because they were so crowded. It got to a point where I would take the local bus, and I lived relatively close to where I worked. I worked on 51st and 5th Avenue, and I lived on 109th and Broadway, technically the Upper West Side of New York. And so it should take me 25 minutes door to door to get to work. But it was taking me upwards of an hour because of the crowded trains forcing me to have to wait. So I decided to take the local bus, which took an hour and a half sometimes, hour and 45 minutes. But it was still easier than forcing myself on this overcrowded train. It was so much easier to wait out in the cold, a slower pace to get to work, and admiring the scenery along Riverside Drive. Unbeknownst to me, this restlessness said to me, I think I want to begin thinking about leaving the US. But I had no plan. So I started scouting. I didn't have the vocabulary to call it a scouting trip back then, but I was just curious with the idea of what it would be like to live somewhere else. And Costa Rica was on one of my top choices, but then I understood that Costa Rica had a really large American population that were buying up the real estate in Costa Rica. So I sort of became discouraged by that. Like, I couldn't compete with housing with someone who had $200,000, $300,000 cash to put down on a condo. Like, I did not have that type of money. And so I became a little disenchanted. It was like, if not Costa Rica, where else? During this time, I was also traveling to other countries. Returned to Italy several times, other European countries, but I still wasn't sold that this was my forever place. So I was really struggling with, like, where am I gonna go? Where am I gonna end up? Then the pandemic happened, 2020 happened, and as we know, that changed all of our lives and the trajectory. And we knew it was a global reset for us to rethink what we were doing. I started to see the crumbling infrastructure in the US. I started to see an increasing inequity. I started to see the rising housing cost, because at the time I was working for a bank doing mortgages, and I started to see the cost of real estate just go up exponentially. So I knew I could not ever afford to buy a home in New York. That was something I had to make peace with, because with the amount of debt that I owed in student loans, remember I went to graduate school, I wouldn't even think about taking out another $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 for another home. I would end up owing, and I didn't want that. So I knew I had to make different choices just because of that. So I was really disenchanted, knew I wanted to move abroad, but had no idea where. I did a few more scouting trips. I went to Portugal, loved and adored Portugal, but it was also becoming very trendy, and it was like Americans were descending upon Portugal, and the cost of living was increasing exponentially. I didn't want to run into the same problem with the cost of living that I was having in the US and in other countries. So I was discouraged with Portugal being an option. And then I remember having a conversation with one of my dear friends, Esther. You've seen her, we've done collab videos together. And she said, why not Italy? You've always had a fondness for Italy. You know, always loved Italy. Why not Italy? And I said, you know, that makes sense. So I started to get more and more comfortable with the idea of Italy. And while I'm still figuring out where I would end up, I was trying to figure out how. Like, how can I live in another country? Because I was tethered to the US, to New York, because my job was location specific. I had to go into the office, I had to go to clients' homes, so I had not figured out a way to translate that to being able to do it remotely. But nevertheless, I started to embody. I wanted to move abroad. What can I do right now to embody a person who's moving abroad? So I did not renew my lease on my apartment. I was happy to move out, and so I moved back in with my mother. So if you're out there and you're looking at this video and you're discouraged about having to relocate to your parents' home to start over, don't be embarrassed, because I moved back in with my mother in 2021, and I was able to buy a house in Italy in 2024. So look at that. Look at that. How you can collapse time if you make better decisions. I started to sell my belongings, donate my belongings, sort of downsize my life. And the fortunate thing about living in New York and being a renter is that you avoid the propensity to accumulate things, because you are a renter and you may have to move in a year or two. And so it discourages you from amassing things, because you have to think about having to move this when the time comes. So that's one of the plus sides, is that I was almost preparing, unbeknownst to me, along the way over the last few years, by not having loads and loads of things that would make it difficult for me to downsize or declutter. I didn't have a story regarding my belongings, and so I could part with them relatively easily. And then I began consuming more move abroad content, like Stephanie Perry. She's one of my favorites, who spoke about being a nomad and her journey of just disconnecting from the US and her reasons for doing that. So I really started to immerse myself in other people who were making this journey. And so I started to feel like I can do this, and it started to change my consciousness. Again, I still had no idea how, because my job was location specific. I did not have a trust fund. I did not have a house that I could rent out and live off the income. And I didn't have a husband at the time. So I knew I had limited options. So I had to make a strategic move. One of the issues that I do have with the Move Abroad content is that they don't lay out any steps for people like me and you to figure it out. They just say, oh, I got sick of the US and I just went on this nomadic journey because I got sick of it. Like, that's not enough for me. I want a place where I can develop roots. I want a place where I could take a shower twice a day. I want a place where I don't have to pick up and leave in a few days. Like, that just would be too much for my nervous system, especially being from New York. I wanted a place where I can exhale for a long period of time and where I can develop roots. And so that was the delta I saw with the Move Abroad content, which I'm going to offer you something regarding that later on in the video, so stay tuned. I also knew, so as we discuss all that background, I knew I didn't want to rent. So I knew I wanted Italy. I knew I didn't want to rent. Why is that? Because I had a lot of poor experience with landlords in New York, and I also thought about the security element, and I wanted security for myself. And for the most part, real estate is security, especially for a woman. And that was important for me to have security. Fortunately, the real estate market in Italy is not as dynamic and convoluted as it is in the United States. So a person who's interested in investing can buy some property for $1,000 that needs renovations, as well as upwards of $500,000. There's a lot of variety in between. I was able to feel comfort in that, knowing there was a place for me that I can afford. I also didn't want to be a nomad. I know it's very seductive to be a nomad. At this point in my life, I don't want to be a nomad. So that's why buying became a more attractive option for me as well. So now we're in maybe 2023, and I knew I wanted to buy real estate in Italy, and I became more intentional about my search. And I started to dedicate hours and hours a day, a week, to searching. And I will say it is a lot of research to find the ideal place for you if Italy is your ultimate destination, because there's so many homes. Italy is not plagued with the housing crisis as it is in the United States. There's an abundance of homes in Italy because of the depopulation, where a lot of young Italians are forced to leave Italy because of employment issues. And so there's a lot of opportunities if you have some resources to purchase a property cash. And like I said, there's a wide range of options for a person who's interested in that. And you don't have to worry and say, oh, I don't have $500,000, therefore I'm priced out of the market, like it is in the United States. My search. I had very short lists of non-negotiables regarding my search, because ultimately a home meant security for me. So I wasn't fixated on superficial things. I wanted a few things that I knew I would be able to transform and make this place my own. Lots of sunlight, minimum 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, bathroom and bedroom on a ground level, move-in ready. I did not want to have to deal with foundational construction issues, because what I know about construction can fit through the head of a needle, which means very little, if anything, about construction. And so that was my search. And then I narrowed it down to regions, because Northern Italy, Middle Italy, and Southern Italy are all very different. So I knew which regions within that would be ideal for me and the type of life that I wanted. And so I began doing showings remotely through WhatsApp, FaceTime. I would prepare my questions ahead of time so that I can ask them in Italian and feel comfortable, rather than not know what to ask at the time. And I had basic questions regarding, the roof, foundation issues, Is there city sewage, or is it a septic tank? Things like that. Is it well water? So those are the things that were really important to me because I was having to manage this. So I imagine as a homeowner, is this manageable for me? I also relied on Italian lawyers that were my representation during these transactions that would help translate the nomenclature that I was not comfortable with, because I have conversational level Italian, not enough to speak about specifications regarding a home, let alone, I don't know if I know those words in English, so in Italian would be even more complicated for me. So I used the resource of having hired Italian attorneys to help me and guide me in the process, and that made the process so much easier. And if you want information about these lawyers, I will link them as well. I worked with the young lady Elena, and she was absolutely wonderful. So that's my journey, and so that allowed me to there was a few ups and downs during the process. It did take a few months to find my ideal home. The last home where I finally put in the offer, from offer to signing, took about 30 days, smooth sailing regarding sending the money and things like that. And I did have like a couple of moments where I was like, oh, am I making the right thing? Like, what if it's a scam? Of course I went through that. And I remember telling my mom, up until when we traveled to Italy and the closing was the following day, I was like, what if it's a scam and I lost all my money? And she's like, well, trust the process. If it is a scam and they steal your money, trust your ability to be able to figure it out. And I was like, that makes sense. I'll be able to figure it out. But needless to say, none of that arised. And that was just the devil. So everything worked out perfectly. I was handed the keys to my home, which I'll insert. And so I want to offer you, because I made this journey and was able to figure out how to move abroad, I want to offer you the opportunity to work with me. If you're curious about moving abroad, not knowing where to start, I will go through the steps to get me to this point, whether you want to rent or whether you want to own, how I bridge the delta between, I don't know where I want to begin, but I want to move abroad. So there is a free guide for you to cover some basic steps if you're considering moving abroad. And then I have a more comprehensive course where week by week you get to work through different exercises to bring you closer to your goal. I need steps. I'm an attorney. I need to follow like one by one. Okay, what do I need to do next? I'm really good at that. And so I think most people are like that. I can't deal with things in the abstract as well as I can deal with steps. Just like a weight loss plan. If you tell me this is what I have to eat for the next 30 days and do this exercise, I could do that. No problems. I don't even have a story about what you're telling me. And so I want to share these steps with you and the opportunity to work with me. And I'm still figuring out a lot of stuff too, but I made this big step and I want to share it with you. So if this is something that you're considering, please send me a message. Please subscribe to my newsletter and think about signing up for my course to work with me one-on-one, week after week, to bring you closer to your goal. Also, as I mentioned earlier, my medical tourism entity is still available. If you're considering medical tourism and you're curious about Colombia as a scouting trip, there's an opportunity for you to also explore if you're dealing with the anxiety of critical medical care. I implore you to begin thinking about medical tourism as an option for you for your health care. If you're a senior, I especially want you to begin thinking about that. And if you are a middle-aged person with senior parents, this may be an option for you. I've done follow-up videos about the cost of medical care in the United States, how it has caused crippling debt for many Americans. Medical tourism is a solution to that. All of that will be linked in the description box. And thank you for allowing me to share my journey with you. Hope you found it interesting. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, share, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.